Have you ever heard the sound of a wind chime when there was no wind? And what if that sound wasn't just coincidence, but a call from a soul still waiting to be seen? Welcome to Vale Marks, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Today's story will take you deep into the woods of a forgotten town, into the eyes of an old Pitbull who waited 9 years for a promise, and the boy who finally answered. Before we begin, ask yourself, have you ever given someone, human or not, a second chance? Stay with us. The ending may just change the way you see love, loss, and loyalty forever. Nestled deep in the blue ridges of the Appalachian foothills sat the quiet little town of Silver Hollow, a place where time moved slower and stories were passed down like family heirlooms. The air smelled of pine and fresh rain, and the mountains wrapped the town like a protective cloak. Most days, nothing much happened here, and the folks liked it that way. But even in a sleepy place like Silver Hollow, there were whispers. Whispers of the bell tree. On the edge of town, where the woods thickened and the road turned to gravel, there stood an old animal rescue called Whispering Pines Shelter. It wasn't fancy. Just a long wooden building with faded green trim, surrounded by wire fencing and rustling maple trees. The kennels were clean, the food bowls always full, and the people who worked there had big hearts and tired hands. But the real soul of the place lived beside the east fence, where a giant sugar maple tree stood, gnarled and sprawling, its branches reaching like open arms toward the sky. Hanging from the thickest branch was an old wind chime fashioned from aged copper and brass, dull with time but still gleaming when the sun hit it just right. Locals called it the bell tree. The story went like this. Years ago, before the shelter even had a name, an old caretaker hung the wind chime there to honor the dogs that had passed without finding homes. On the day the first bell rang without wind, a family had come, unannounced, and adopted the dog who had been waiting the longest. From then on, folks started to believe that when the bell rang and there was no wind, it meant that one of the forgotten dogs was calling out for someone meant just for them. Skeptics brushed it off as coincidence, but the old-timers in town knew better. They said the bell tree only rang for souls with hearts strong enough to keep hoping, even after everyone else had stopped looking. And that brings us to Rowan. Rowan was a pit bull, a stocky, broad-chested boy with a white blaze on his face and a soft brown coat that had dulled with time. He had a scar along his left shoulder, a crooked line beneath his fur, a remnant of something no one talked about anymore. 9 years ago, he was found wandering near an abandoned barn after a fire, trembling but silent, his paws raw and eyes wide with confusion. He was only 2 then. Most dogs at Whispering Pines stayed a few weeks, maybe a few months. Puppies were scooped up in days. Even the older ones, if they were small or fluffy enough, didn't stay long. But Rowan stayed. Year after year, people came and went. Volunteers changed, families adopted, seasons passed. But Rowan remained. Not because he was dangerous or unfriendly. In fact, he had never once growled, never barked without reason. He followed commands, walked gently on a leash, and offered his paw to anyone who asked. But when visitors arrived, they often paused at his kennel, looked at his broad frame and pit bull face, and then moved on. Too strong, they'd murmur. Too serious. Too risky. But Rowan didn't beg, didn't whine. He didn't jump at the gate or bark for attention. He would simply rise, slowly, with the calm grace of a soul who had learned to wait, and sit quietly near the bars. His eyes, warm and tired, would meet theirs with a silent question. Are you the one? No one ever was. Staff members grew attached, of course. They gave him extra blankets in the winter and cool treats in the summer. One girl crocheted a collar cover with little stars on it. Another volunteer made a nameplate for his kennel that read, "The Gentle Guardian." Rowan became something of a legend within the shelter, known for his patience, his stillness, and his quiet understanding. But even the most beloved dogs feel the ache of waiting too long. Some mornings, the workers found him sitting near the bell tree, his back to the kennel, staring at the chimes. No one had ever trained him to do that. He had simply started walking there one day and never stopped. When storms rolled in or the air grew heavy, Rowan would lie down beneath the tree and look up, as if waiting for something none of them could see. Then came the morning the bell rang. It was early spring, the kind where the trees hadn't quite decided if they were ready to bloom. Mist clung to the ground like a second skin, and the sky hung low and gray. There was no wind, not even a breeze. Inside the shelter, the air was still. The only sound was the rhythmic clink of metal bowls as staff prepared breakfast. And then, clear and sudden, it rang. The bell on the old tree gave a sharp single chime. Not the soft, sleepy jingle it sometimes made when the wind rolled through, but a bright, deliberate sound that echoed through the trees. Everyone froze. It had been years since it had rung without a breeze. The last time, a senior dog had found her forever home just days later. But Rowan had been here longer than any of them. If the bell was for him, why now? The staff walked out slowly. The tree stood still. The air was motionless, yet the bell swung gently, like someone had touched it with invisible fingers. Rowan was already there, sitting beneath it. He wasn't panting, wasn't looking around, just sitting in silence, watching the horizon. "He heard it," one of the caretakers whispered. Another nodded. "Maybe someone's finally coming for him." No one said anything else. There was a quiet reverence in the air, the kind that wrapped around your heart and held it steady. Whether it was coincidence or fate, everyone knew something had shifted, because the bell tree had spoken, and for Rowan, the dog no one chose, the dog who had waited 9 long years, it might finally be time. Caleb was 11 the year everything changed. He used to be loud. He used to laugh too hard at his mom's silly jokes, talk through movies, and draw comic books on napkins during dinner. But after the accident, after the silence left behind by the lake swallowed his mother whole, he stopped making noise. His dad tried to smile when he packed school lunches, tried to talk about baseball like it still mattered. But grief has a way of settling between people like fog, quiet, thick, impossible to see through. So when they packed their life into a truck and drove to Silver Hollow, neither father nor son said much. The road curved through hills and trees, and the town blinked into view like something out of a postcard. It was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a pause, a place to catch their breath with the help of Caleb's grandfather, who had retired in the quiet mountain town years ago. The old man greeted them with warm biscuits and a gruff kind of love. His house sat on the edge of the woods, surrounded by tall trees and creaky porch steps. He had once worked as a rescue handler, helping train dogs for search and recovery teams. Now he spent his time gardening and fixing things that didn't need fixing. Caleb didn't know what to think of him yet, but at least the house didn't feel like it was haunted by memories. Not yet. On the second morning in Silver Hollow, Caleb woke before the sun. He didn't say why. He just grabbed his notebook, stuffed a pencil in his hoodie pocket, and slipped out the door while the dew was still fresh on the grass. He wandered. The forest felt different than the city parks he used to walk with his mom. It was thicker, older, full of sounds he couldn't name. But it didn't scare him. In fact, it was the first place since her death that didn't feel like it was pressing down on his chest. As he wandered deeper into the woods, something delicate caught his ear, a soft ringing, too clear to be imagined. He paused. There was no breeze, yet the sound danced like silver across the trees. A bell? Curiosity tugged at him. He turned toward the sound, stepping over roots and around patches of wild fern. The path wasn't marked, but it felt intentional, like it was meant for him. And then he saw it. Through a break in the trees stood a long, low building with faded paint and a fence that had seen better days. A wooden sign read, "Whispering Pines Shelter." And beside the building, towering above the roofline, stood an ancient maple tree with limbs spread wide. Hanging from its strongest branch was a wind chime, old, copper, heavy, and yet it swayed gently in the still air. The bell rang again. Caleb walked slowly toward the shelter. The front gate creaked as he pushed it open, but no one seemed to mind. A few dogs barked, more out of habit than excitement. He moved past them quietly, not stopping until he reached the far end of the building, near the big tree. And that's when he saw him. A dog, large, broad-shouldered, with a deep brown coat streaked in white and a scar like a whisper along his shoulder, stood just behind the wire gate of kennel number 12. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just stepped forward slowly and sat down, eyes fixed on the boy as if trying to remember something. Their eyes locked. Rowan's gaze wasn't demanding. It wasn't pleading. It was calm, steady, like he knew exactly who this child was. Caleb felt his throat tighten. There were other dogs, younger, smaller, ones with wagging tails and bright eyes, but none of them looked at him the way Rowan did, like they were the only two people left in the world. Caleb stepped closer to the gate. He crouched down, tucking his sketchbook under one arm. He studied the dog's face. The patches of white around his muzzle, the slight tremble in his back leg, the gentleness hiding behind a frame most people would cross the street to avoid. "You're not scary," Caleb whispered. "You look like me." Rowan blinked. His tail didn't wag, but he leaned forward, ever so slightly, and pressed his nose to the gate. The moment was so quiet it might have been missed, but someone had seen it. Behind him, one of the shelter volunteers, Clara, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag shaped like a bone, stood watching. "You came out of the woods?" she asked gently. Caleb nodded. "You heard the bell?" Another nod. Clara glanced at Rowan, then back at the boy. No one's ever picked him before, not once. Caleb didn't reply. He didn't need to. A few minutes later, his father arrived, breathless and worried. But when he saw Caleb sitting beside the kennel, silent but not alone, he stopped short. Clara leaned in and whispered, "I think he's choosing." And indeed, he was. Because in a world full of perfect puppies and picture-ready smiles, an 11-year-old boy with a heavy heart had seen what no one else had bothered to notice. A quiet dog with a story written in scars and silence. And somehow, they both knew. This was no accident. This was the beginning. Rowan didn't bark on the car ride home. He didn't pant or whine or press his nose to the window like dogs in movies often did. He simply sat, still and calm in the back seat, his eyes half closed, as if the journey itself was something sacred. Caleb sat beside him, one hand resting on the old dog's back, not saying a word. He hadn't said much at all in months, but something about Rowan made silence feel less empty. Their new life together began without ceremony. No balloons, no new dog toys scattered across the floor. Just a quiet walk up the front steps of Caleb's grandfather's house and a soft click of the door as it closed behind them. Caleb didn't ask for a leash or a new collar. He didn't ask for anything, really. That afternoon, he gathered some string, a few pieces of driftwood from the old shed, and a set of broken wind chimes his grandfather had meant to throw away. He tied them together clumsily but with purpose, and hung the new creation on the lowest branch of the sugar maple in their backyard. Rowan watched from the porch. He didn't move much that day, just followed Caleb from room to room, slow and steady, like a shadow learning new patterns. When night fell and the lights in the house went dark, Caleb took his blanket and curled up on the rug beside Rowan, just beneath the window. His father came to say good night but stopped short when he saw them there, boy and dog, back to back, breathing in sync. He didn't interrupt. Days passed. Rowan settled into the rhythm of his new home with quiet ease. He wasn't curious like a puppy or excitable like most dogs. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had already seen the world and decided it didn't need to be rushed. He had his spots, beneath the window, beside the wood stove, and most often, under the tree with Caleb's wind chime swaying gently above him. Caleb didn't speak much, not even to his father, but he started to draw again. At first, it was just simple sketches. Rowan's face, the tilt of his ears, the way he sat like a statue watching the horizon. Then the drawings became more detailed. He began filling whole pages with scenes. Rowan beneath a starlit sky, Rowan curled up in the grass, Rowan with golden leaves raining down around him like confetti. Each drawing said what Caleb couldn't, as if his pencil could whisper the words that still got caught in his throat. His father noticed the change. The boy who had stopped expressing anything now carried his sketchbook everywhere. And in every sketch, there was Rowan. Always quiet, always close, always steady. Some nights, Rowan would stir in his sleep, letting out soft huffs and muffled barks, paws twitching against dreams only he could see. Caleb would sit up and place a hand gently on his shoulder until the old dog stilled again. They didn't need words. Presence was enough. One particular evening, the air turned colder. The leaves had begun their slow transformation, painting the world in amber and rust. Caleb spent most of the day beneath the maple tree, sketching with his hoodie pulled up and his knees curled under him. Rowan lay beside him, unmoving, except for the occasional flick of an ear or shift of breath. As dusk fell, Caleb tied another strand of metal to the wind chime, this time a key he found in his mother's jewelry box. He didn't know what it had once unlocked, only that she had kept it. He tied it tight, and the chime gave a new note when it moved. Higher, more delicate. That night, as the house slept, a sound rang out into the stillness. The chime sang. There was no wind. Caleb stirred. His eyes blinked open, adjusting to the faint moonlight casting long shadows through the window. He sat up slowly, heart beating faster. The room was quiet, but the bell outside swayed gently. A second note rang out, then a third. He rose and stepped outside barefoot, across the cool boards of the porch, past the creaking steps, and into the yard. Rowan was already there, standing beneath the tree, eyes fixed upward, ears alert. Caleb stood beside him. And then, in that silver-lit moment, he saw her. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper, something from the place in him that still remembered the warmth of her hugs and the sound of her humming in the kitchen. His mother stood beneath the tree in his mind, smiling, her hand resting gently on Rowan's head. "He's been waiting for you too," she said. The vision faded as quickly as it came. Just a breath, a blink, but it stayed. Caleb looked down at Rowan. The old dog had laid back down, resting his chin on his paws, watching Caleb the way only animals can, without judgment, without question. And for the first time since the accident, Caleb spoke. A whisper. "Me too." He didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside him cracked open, and the air around him felt a little less heavy. From that night on, Rowan never left the spot beneath the wind chime. And Caleb never drew another picture without including the tree. They were both healing. Quietly. Together. Autumn deepened in Silver Hollow. The air turned crisp, painting the edges of each morning in mist and gold. The maple leaves fell faster now, carpeting the backyard in a quiet kind of beauty. Caleb continued to draw, Rowan lying in fallen leaves, Rowan sleeping beneath the tree, Rowan looking out toward something unseen. But his sketches had changed. There was more light in them now, more movement. The heavy stillness that once clouded every page had begun to lift. And so had Caleb's voice. It started with whispers, little murmurs to Rowan during walks or as he handed him breakfast, then short sentences, then questions. He still didn't talk much to his dad, but with Rowan, he spoke like someone slowly returning from far away. No one pushed him, not his father, not his grandfather. They all knew grief worked on its own schedule. They just listened, they watched, and they waited. One cold afternoon, while cleaning out the storage shed in the backyard, Caleb stumbled upon a dust-covered box labeled Misk Sarah in his mother's handwriting. He hesitated. The name alone made his chest tighten. But something tugged at him. Curiosity, maybe, or something else. He sat cross-legged in the dim light of the shed and opened the box. Inside were a few old sweaters, a stack of floppy disks, some framed photos, and a cloth-bound notebook with a cracked spine. The cover was soft, worn from years of handling. No title, just the initials ST scribbled in the bottom corner. Caleb opened it carefully. It was his mother's journal. He didn't intend to read much, just a page, maybe two. But once he started, he couldn't stop. Her handwriting was neat, sometimes rushed, always familiar. There were entries about work, about him as a toddler, about wildflowers and rainy days. But halfway through, the tone shifted. Today, I found him limping near the back fence of the Johnson place. Smoke still in the air, ash on his coat. Poor thing didn't even bark. Just looked at me like he already knew no one was coming back. Pitbull mix, broad chest, eyes too old for his age. I'm calling him Rowan. Caleb's breath caught. No one wants him, of course. They see the breed, the scars, and they look away. But he's gentle. So gentle. I've never seen a dog watch the world with such patience. I'm going to take care of him, just until I can convince the shelter to give him a proper chance. Or maybe I'll bring him home. Entry after entry, Caleb read about her visits to Whispering Pines, about how she brought Rowan blankets in the winter, sneaked in his favorite peanut butter treats, how she sat beneath the bell tree and talked to him when things got hard. She called him her secret soft place. And then, in one of the last entries, written just weeks before her death, I promised him I'd come back. I told him he wouldn't have to wait forever. I meant it. Just need a little more time. Things have been crazy. Caleb's school, work, the new house stuff. But soon, I'll bring him home. He's already family. Caleb stopped reading. He stared at the page, his heart pounding in his ears. The pieces fit together now. The way Rowan looked at him, the way he never barked, never begged, the way he waited, so still and sure, like he had done it before. Rowan wasn't just any dog. He was her dog. Her promise. Her unfinished kindness. Her waiting heart, sitting behind a kennel door year after year. And she hadn't kept that promise. Not because she didn't want to, but because fate didn't let her. Caleb set the journal down and pressed his palms to his eyes. He didn't cry. Not the way he had when they first told him she was gone. This grief was different. Softer. Like walking into a room that still smelled like her favorite soap. Like realizing someone had been trying to tell him something all along. He found Rowan in the backyard, lying beneath the wind chime. Caleb sat beside him, cross-legged, same as always. For a long time, neither of them moved. The leaves rustled gently overhead. The chime gave a soft, metallic sigh. I found Mom's journal, Caleb said quietly. His voice trembled but didn't break. She wrote about you. Rowan looked at him, those steady brown eyes holding something deep and ancient. Recognition, understanding, love. She said you were waiting, Caleb whispered. She said she was coming back for you. Rowan shifted closer, resting his head on the boy's knee. I'm sorry she didn't get the chance. The old dog let out a low, contented breath. Caleb reached for his sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. He began to draw. Not just Rowan this time, but her too, his mother beneath the bell tree, her hand resting on Rowan's head, the wind chime above them both, caught mid-sway. As the drawing came to life, Caleb spoke again, this time with certainty. "She didn't forget you, and I won't either." From that day forward, Caleb spoke more. He asked his father questions. He helped his grandfather in the garden. He even started going to the shelter on weekends to volunteer. But no matter how much his world grew, one thing remained constant. Every night before bed, he sat beside Rowan, sketchbook in hand. And every time the wind chime rang, even when the wind didn't blow, he listened closely, because now he knew. The bell wasn't just a legend, it was a promise. The storm rolled in without warning. One minute, the sky over Silver Hollow was streaked with gentle autumn light. The next, it was swallowed whole by a curtain of deep gray. Thunder rumbled low, like the growl of something ancient rising in the distance, and the air turned heavy, thick with that wild electricity that always comes before a downpour. Inside the house, Caleb sat by the front window, sketchbook open on his knees. He was drawing Rowan again, this time in motion, running beneath leaves, ears perked, eyes alight with purpose. The real Rowan was asleep nearby, curled on his blanket beneath the wood stove, breathing slow and steady. His tail twitched every so often, caught in some quiet dream. Then came the first strike of lightning. It shattered the horizon, lighting the world in white for half a second. The house shook, and with it, Rowan's body jolted upright. His ears snapped forward, his nose lifted. A low, uneasy growl rumbled from his chest. Caleb looked up, startled. Another flash. Then came the wind. The chime outside, Caleb's handmade wind chime beneath the maple, began to ring wildly, its notes frantic and sharp. Not the soft, ghostly whisper he had come to know. This was different. Urgent. Warning. Rowan stood now, stiff-legged, eyes fixed on the window. Caleb rose and moved to him, hand outstretched. "It's just a storm, buddy," he whispered. "We're okay." But Rowan wasn't listening. With a sudden guttural bark, so unlike his usual silence, the old dog bolted. His legs, though stiff and slow in recent months, moved with a strength that startled Caleb. Before anyone could stop him, Rowan leapt down the steps, across the porch, and vanished into the storm. "Rowan!" Caleb shouted, heart hammering. His father appeared from the kitchen, confused. "What happened?" "He ran," Caleb cried. "Something scared him. He went toward the woods." His grandfather was already grabbing flashlights. "We go now," he said, no hesitation in his voice. "We'll split up near the old trail." The rain began to fall in heavy sheets as the three of them plunged into the storm. Trees swayed violently. Branches cracked. The forest that had once felt calm and inviting now loomed wild and unknowable. Caleb's breath came in short gasps as he called out again and again. "Rowan! Rowan! Where are you?" The wind stole his voice. Thunder drowned the rest. Minutes passed, maybe more. The world had narrowed to rain and mud and panic. Caleb's flashlight flickered against soaked bark and whipping limbs. And then, just as he began to feel the cold truly reach his bones, he saw it. A glimmer of copper. The bell tree. It stood in the distance, framed by a curtain of rain, its massive trunk unmoving even as the storm howled around it. And beneath it, barely visible in the shadows, was a shape. Caleb ran, slipping once, catching himself on a root. His grandfather's voice called behind him, but he didn't stop. Rowan was lying at the base of the tree, soaked, still, silent. "Rowan!" Caleb dropped to his knees beside him, hands trembling. "No, no, please!" The old dog's eyes fluttered open, just barely. Caleb reached out and touched the soaked fur of Rowan's neck, and felt something unfamiliar beneath his fingers. A collar, not his current one. It was old, hand-woven from blue thread and soft fabric, faded from time but still intact. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. It was the collar his mother had made. Somehow, in the chaos, Rowan had found it. Or maybe it had found him. His father and grandfather reached them moments later. They wrapped Rowan in Caleb's jacket and carried him carefully back to the house. No one spoke much. The storm still roared, but inside a hush had fallen. Rowan was alive, but barely. The vet came later that night, a neighbor from 2 streets over. She checked his heart, listened to his lungs, gave him something to ease the strain. "He's exhausted," she said gently. "Old dogs, they give everything when they feel like they need to protect something." Or someone. Rowan didn't move much after that. He rested, wrapped in blankets near the fire, head resting on a folded towel, eyes only half open. Caleb never left his side. He didn't cry. Not that night. He just sat there, holding the collar in his hands, fingers tracing the threads. The same threads his mother had once tied together with love. The same ones that had rested against Rowan's fur all those years ago. It didn't make sense. How the collar had appeared, how Rowan had known where to go, how the bell had rung in that wild, impossible way. But some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things are just known. Later, after the storm passed, Caleb stood beneath the maple, wind chime now still. The tree was soaked, the earth below it torn where Rowan had collapsed. And yet it felt peaceful. Like whatever had called the storm into motion had also guided Rowan home. Caleb looked up at the tree's branches, then back toward the house, where the glow of firelight flickered in the window. Something had changed in him. He wasn't the same boy who had walked into Whispering Pines weeks ago. He wasn't the same child who had spent months hiding behind silence and sketches. That night, something inside him grew. Not loudly, not all at once, but unmistakably. Because watching someone you love run into the storm to protect what they care about, it forces you to see the world differently. And for Caleb, it marked the beginning of something new. A quiet courage, a steady heart, and a vow made beneath the bell tree that he would never let Rowan face anything alone again. Winter came quietly to Silver Hollow. The first snow didn't roar in with wind or thunder. It drifted down like a lullaby, blanketing the earth in stillness. The trees wore crowns of white, and the rooftops shimmered under pale moonlight. It was beautiful, peaceful. But inside the little house near the woods, the quiet felt heavier. Rowan had grown weaker with each passing week. The storm in autumn had taken something from him, something even love and warmth couldn't quite restore. He still tried, in his own gentle way. He wagged his tail when Caleb entered the room. He lifted his head when his name was spoken, but the strength in his legs had faded. His breaths grew slower, deeper, as if each one took more effort to find. That night, the snow began to fall just after dusk. Caleb didn't sleep. He had a feeling, not panic, not dread, but something tender and unspoken. He took Rowan's blanket, the one with faded blue stars, and laid it near the fireplace. Then he gathered the journal, his mother's journal, and sat beside his old friend beneath the soft golden glow of the hearth. Rowan lay curled, eyes half closed, but awake. Caleb opened the book. His voice was quiet at first, but steady. He read the passages his mother had written years ago, about Rowan's rescue, about her whispered promises, about the hope she had tucked inside every visit to the shelter. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the yard, the porch, the branches of the bell tree. But inside, time seemed to slow, stretching to hold space for one last night of memories. Caleb kept reading. He doesn't ask for anything, not even attention. But when you look into his eyes, you feel like you've been seen. Rowan's tail thumped faintly once. Sometimes when I sit beside him, I forget everything that hurts. He doesn't try to fix it, he just stays. And that's enough. Rowan shifted slightly, his nose brushing against Caleb's foot. Then, finally, Caleb reached a page he had always skimmed before, one he hadn't had the strength to read until now. If Caleb ever meets Rowan, I hope he knows what kindness looks like. I hope he feels it, not in words, but in presence. Because that's what Rowan is. He's the kind of love that stays quiet, the kind that never walks away. Caleb's voice cracked on the last sentence. And that's when Rowan moved. So slowly, so gently. He reached out with what strength remained and touched his nose to Caleb's hand. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't goodbye. It was understanding. Caleb didn't speak. He just held Rowan's head carefully, pressing his cheek to the old dog's fur, feeling the soft warmth of his final breaths. And then, silence. Rowan's chest rose one last time and didn't rise again. For a long while, Caleb didn't move. The room was still. The fire crackled softly. Snow fell outside in a hush. Then, through the silence, the wind chime on the bell tree stirred. One single note, clear, software, certain. Caleb looked toward the window, blinking through tears. The chime swayed gently on its thread, even though the world outside was still. He smiled, eyes wet. "You kept your promise," he whispered. The house was quiet again, but in that moment it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a promise fulfilled, like love remembered, like a life that had waited, finally, completely seen. Winter melted into spring, and with it, a new season began, not just in the woods of Silver Hollow, but in the hearts of those who had been touched by a dog who never gave up waiting. After Rowan's passing, the house felt quieter than ever. The spot by the fireplace remained empty. The backyard, once filled with the slow, steady rhythm of old paws, now echoed only with memory. But Caleb didn't let the silence grow too loud. Instead, he turned it into something. With the help of his grandfather, Caleb started a blog. They called it Rowan's Ring. It wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about trends. It was about stories, quiet, powerful stories. Stories of the overlooked, the misunderstood, the dogs with graying muzzles, the ones too big, too shy, or simply too different, the ones who sat for years behind shelter bars, waiting like Rowan once did. The first post was simple. A photo of Rowan lying under the bell tree, his eyes closed, his head resting gently in Caleb's lap. He wasn't anyone's first choice, but he was mine, and he changed everything. Within days, the blog found its way into homes far beyond Silver Hollow. Letters and messages poured in, photos, handwritten notes, emails from people who had never considered adopting an older dog until they read about Rowan. A woman from New Mexico wrote, "I was going to get a puppy, but then I read about Rowan. I brought home Max instead. He's 12, blind in one eye, and perfect." A teenager in Ohio posted a picture of himself with a big brindle Pitbull named Queenie, both of them grinning in the backyard. Everyone told me to get a different breed, but Rowan reminded me that kindness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just waiting to be seen. And over, one phrase repeated like a quiet heartbeat across the world. I chose a Pitbull because of Rowan. Back at Whispering Pines shelter, change began to bloom as well. Inspired by the movement Rowan's Ring had sparked, the staff decided to create something permanent. Behind the main shelter building, where the woods opened into a clearing, they built a new space. Soft walking paths, garden benches, and wide, grassy runs where older dogs could stretch in the sun without the chaos of barking puppies nearby. They named it Bell Garden. It became a sanctuary for the seniors, the misunderstood, the ones labeled unadoptable. But here they weren't forgotten. They were first in line. At the center of the garden, hung from a sturdy oak branch, was a newly crafted wind chime, larger than the one at Caleb's house, but built in the same spirit. Its pieces were made of reclaimed copper, gently aged, and every time the wind swept through, the notes carried soft and sweet through the garden paths. Beneath it, mounted on a polished stone, was a brass plaque. To the one who waited, and the boy who answered. Visitors stopped often to read the inscription. Volunteers knelt beside it to whisper thank yous. Children would sometimes ask, "Who was the dog?" And someone would smile and point to the photograph hanging just inside the shelter, Rowan, lying under the tree with Caleb's sketchbook resting beside him. Rowan's ring became more than a blog. It became a reminder. That patience is a kind of bravery. That kindness can be quiet. That even those left behind still have a story waiting to be heard. And that sometimes all it takes is one boy to answer a bell no one else hears. And when he does, everything changes. Forever. 5 years passed like pages turning in a well-worn book. Silver Hollow remained much the same, quiet, wrapped in pine and mist, with the bell tree still standing watch beside the old shelter. But Caleb? Caleb had grown. He was 16 now, taller and steadier, his voice deeper, his gaze more knowing. The boy who had once barely spoken was now the voice behind a growing movement. He called it Echoes of Rowan. What started as a single blog post about an old Pitbull who waited too long had grown into a YouTube channel with thousands of subscribers. Caleb didn't post flashy videos. There were no viral stunts or clickbait thumbnails. Just quiet stories, real rescues told gently, with honesty and heart. Senior dogs, shelter underdogs, misunderstood breeds. He told their stories the way he had once told Rowan's, like they mattered, because they did. One crisp spring afternoon, Caleb returned to Whispering Pines Shelter for a recording session. He hadn't been back in a while. The staff greeted him like family. Clara, now a little grayer but just as warm, hugged him tight. She still called him the boy with the bell in his heart. They walked through Bell Garden together, past the wind chime and the copper plaque. Caleb paused to touch the inscription with his fingertips. To the one who waited, and the boy who answered. He never stopped feeling that moment, the one that started it all. Clara handed him the updated shelter list. "Most of our seniors have been placed," she said with a smile, "because of you." Caleb didn't answer. He just smiled and tucked the paper into his pocket. Later that day, after the cameras had been packed and the sun began to dip behind the trees, Caleb lingered. The wind was calm. Birds sang lazily in the branches. The world felt full. He stood near the bell tree, listening. Then, softly, unmistakably, it rang. The chime. Once. Twice. Caleb turned slowly. There was no breeze. He followed the sound toward the older kennels, now mostly used for dogs waiting longer than most. He walked past empty runs and sleepy eyes until he reached the far end. There, in the very last kennel, sat a dog, a Pitbull. She was small, with a silver-blue coat and a faint scar above her brow. She didn't bark, didn't move, just sat still, head slightly tilted, watching him. Caleb didn't say anything at first. He simply approached the gate and crouched down. He recognized that look. It was the same one Rowan had given him once. Quiet, steady, not begging to be chosen, only asking to be seen. Caleb slowly reached out his hand through the bars, palm up. "You don't have to wait anymore," he whispered. "I heard you." The Pitbull didn't move for a moment. Then she leaned forward and touched her nose gently to his fingers. It was quiet, so quiet. No voices, no applause, just two beings in understanding. The bell rang again, only once. But this time, Caleb knew. It wasn't the wind. It was her. It was something deeper than chance, something older than coincidence. He stood, his heart full and calm. Clara had been watching from the doorway, her eyes shimmering. "Her name's Luna," she said quietly. "No one's asked about her until now." Caleb turned toward her and nodded. They didn't need to. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting golden light across Bell Garden. Caleb filled out the paperwork as the shelter staff smiled quietly around him. The moment felt familiar, sacred. Before they left, he returned once more to the bell tree, Luna trotting gently beside him. He looked up at the wind chime, and for a moment, it was like Rowan was there, watching, wagging, proud. The bell gave one final soft chime as the breeze stirred, and this time Caleb smiled, not with tears but with certainty, because the world may forget those who wait the longest, but some hearts will always hear what others miss, and those hearts, they never stop answering. Sometimes the quietest beings leave the loudest echoes in our hearts. Rowan was never the fastest or the flashiest, but he waited, and in that waiting, he taught us what it means to be patient, to be present, to be enough. Here on Vale Marks, stories like this are more than just tales. They're reminders that love is not always loud, that kindness isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up, again and again. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below, share your thoughts, or a story of a soul who changed you. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating meaningful content like this. Your support is the heartbeat behind every story we tell. As the old saying goes, not all heroes bark, some simply wait.